Welcome to Cyberworld. You know, some of my fondest childhood memories are playing multiplayer games. Whether that's queuing up for a match of paintball in Roblox, or going mining with some friends in a Minecraft server, or just wandering around chat room MMOs. And every once in a while, I'll recall one of these games or find a years old save and have a little walk down memory lane. Inevitably though, something feels different revisiting these so many years later.
The servers are empty. Despite years passing, the worlds are exactly as they were. At times, the games don't work or even exist anymore. The act of revisiting these memories from my childhood often feels less like traveling back in time and more like exploring some abandoned memory or resurrecting something long dead.
In places like this, we may begin to feel something strange, something we can't quite place. We feel it in the absent places where players used to be, in the time that has passed since we were last here. By some mechanism we can't quite understand, we feel the ghosts of these places.
Today, I'd like to explore some of these dying, abandoned, deserted, and forgotten virtual worlds, from dead Minecraft servers to lost MMOs and vacant multiplayer maps of a variety of different games, in an attempt to find and better understand these digital apparitions, these ghosts in the machine. And in this journey, we'll discover decade-old messages left by other players, moments of unexpected beauty and unexpected horror, and try to make sense of it all through some actual analysis.
Care to join me? In the year 1996, writer and explorer Jeff Chapman published the first issue of Infiltration, the zine about going places you're not supposed to go. Here on page 4, he coins a now ubiquitous phrase, urban exploration, a term used to describe the act of gaining access to and exploring man-made structures and environments. Abandoned buildings, storm drains, utility tunnels, a sort of interior tourism which allows the curious-minded to see all sorts of things which they're not supposed to see. While there are a myriad of reasons one might get involved in this unorthodox hobby, it's clear one of the biggest draws is the eerie quality to finding yourself in a place built for and once filled with people, now empty. This feeling has been described as a kind of melancholy, nostalgia, or even unease. Dubbed canopsia by the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, this also seems to be the driving force behind the perhaps kitsch liminal space trend, and sociologist Michael Mayerford Bell described a similar phenomenon as the ghost of place. Who has not had that sense while creeping into some room where one really should not have been, that someone unseen was watching? I'll discuss that all more later. But these conversations almost entirely center around the physical world, which makes perfect sense. That's the world where people and structures exist, and where they can occupy them, for the most part. In recent decades, the virtual worlds of video games, chat rooms, and digital 3D space offer a new opportunity for exploration. But, with a few exceptions, most of the analysis of these topics hasn't caught up to this new frontier. What I'm going to try to do today is a little bit of digital urbexing. I've gathered some games to play, some from my childhood and some new to me, and I found empty multiplayer maps and dead servers to explore. There are two main things that will be guiding my exploration of these places. First of all, the main focus will be exploration. I won't be spending too much time on the history of these places. This is more so about the experience of exploring abandoned places in the digital space. Secondly, I want to look at specifically multiplayer or social spaces. It's one thing to download a single player map and play around in it, but I think what creates this unique experience is the fact that these are either designed for or contain the remnants of other players. I'll be going a bit deeper into the analysis in the back half of the video, but for now, let's jump into the first game. Source games are very near and dear to my heart. I grew up playing Garry's Mod and Team Fortress 2, and my first playthrough of the Half-Life games are some of my favorite gaming memories. It's been discussed before, including by myself, that there is a certain quality to the Source engine that can make playing games like Garry's Mod alone a little strange, uneasy. So when putting together this video, source maps were where my mind went first. Now this is one of the only games we're going to be looking at that isn't technically an abandoned server. I'm going to be loading some multiplayer maps into Gmod and exploring them through the lens of digital Urbex. I want to try to better understand this uneasy feeling people seem to have with source maps specifically, and I think looking through these could also help us become better prepared for when we dive into the abandoned servers of Minecraft, Roblox, Blockland, and more. The first map we'll be looking at is RP Downtown. RP Downtown is a quaint recreation of a small, closed-in portion of a city. The roads leading in or out have been blocked off, and the streets are empty. The buildings which surround us are brick and concrete, and mostly devoid of furniture. The centerpiece of this modest urban area seems to be this fountain. One of the first things I noticed about the atmosphere of this place was the sound. The ambient noise of traffic and the occasional police siren, some sort of construction or loud metal creaks. You wouldn't normally think too hard about these sounds if you were playing with some friends or engaged in some kind of roleplay game mode, but exploring like this, when it's just you and the emptiness, it becomes a lot more apparent. They all imply a lively, bustling world, seemingly just outside the confines of these blocked roads, which gives the whole place a sense of isolation, like we're quarantined from the rest of the world. Or maybe they're the echoes of the sounds this place was once filled with, the animated city it used to be. Now it's empty and barren, and the only evidence of its past are these ghostly reverberations. After exploring the empty storefronts above ground, I found my way underground, into the train station. Having just replayed Lost in Vivo recently, I was admittedly a little on edge. The sound of a train resounded through the tunnel, but the train never came. Again, like a ghost. From here, I found my way through the snaking tunnels of some kind of drainage system under the city. It was dark and watery and seemingly just as empty as the roads above me. The atmosphere was decidedly more uneasy though, for sure. Maybe it's just too many horror games, but the dark, winding hallways and underground ambience seemed primed for some kind of monster to jump out at any point. But of course, none did. That, I think, is another kind of ghost. The feeling of a monster that I placed in these tunnels because of my previous experiences and expectations, one which was never there, and I knew wasn't ever really going to appear, but whose presence I could feel due to my expectations of the atmosphere and the environment. I made my way back up to the surface and explored some more. A surprising amount of these buildings were locked, leaving me to peer inside their windows or break in via crowbar. Either way, they were almost all completely empty. Apartments, stores, office buildings. But even though they were empty, they didn't feel untouched, more so abandoned. And I think the reason for this is because of the games which most of these source maps get their assets from. Half-Life 2 is a game that takes place in a Soviet-inspired dystopia / post-apocalypse. Counter-Strike plays across war-torn battlefields. So even environments like this one have a certain battered, worn look, adding to this feel of abandonment. And the aforementioned emptiness of these maps informs this feeling too. Many maps like this one are made up of almost entirely empty buildings to allow players to decorate it themselves. In general, these maps are created with many players in mind, players who want to build and drive vehicles and interact. This leads to wide open spaces and lots of room, and when that space is empty, you can feel it. You can tell people were meant to be here, but aren't. Industrial 17 is a roleplay map inspired by Half-Life City 17,
and even starts you in the train station from the start of Half-Life 2. The atmosphere here is genuinely incredible, from the lighting to the sound design to the set dressing. It definitely feels less empty than downtown, but no less isolated. The sounds of the outside still imply that ghostly presence of a bustling environment, while the dark city streets have not a soul in sight. Even inside the deserted apartments and buildings, you can hear the sounds of people eating or coughing. Which makes the entire place feel haunted. The completely vacant buildings, combined with the map's more direct dystopian influence, makes it feel like the site of some kind of tragedy, where every living soul has been evacuated, and you've either stumbled in here or been left behind. Perhaps the most striking and haunted feeling location in this whole map was this bar/lounge. Walking inside, the sounds of the city fade away and are replaced by the sound of a crackling radio or record player. The stage is empty and the seats are uninhabited, but the quiet noise of unseen patrons can be heard faintly. It genuinely feels haunted. It was not long into my exploration that I found my way back under the ground in another sewer system. The grim red lighting of this place was even more directly menacing, and I could feel again that expectation of some threat inside these tunnels. To be fair to me though, map makers do often include little spooky Easter eggs or jump scares, so I think some mild anxiety is warranted. This map is a classic, though to be fair, Downtown and Industrial 17 are as well. I was just never really into the roleplay scene of Gary's mod. Though not a big Counter-Strike player, I have played a countless amount of TTT and Murder on CS Office before, so I was interested to see what I could get out of it, trying to view it through the lens of digital Urbex. One thing I'll give this map right off the bat is how cold this place feels. The sound of freezing wind whipping through the air is really effective, and where the sounds of distant traffic in previous maps added an isolated quality in one way, the relative absence of these sounds with the wind makes it feel even more isolated, like you're the last person on Earth walking into this empty office building. That sense of cold also gives a certain sense of coziness to the office, a respite from the freezing outdoors. The only real sound which might give you pause here is the sounds of the elevator dinging every once in a while. There's that haunted presence I was expecting. There is also definitely a sense of tragedy here, like some of the others, in a strange way. Obviously, the map was designed to be in the middle of an armed conflict, so you'll see office furniture strewn around on the ground and vending machines knocked over. But now that things have calmed down to near silence, it feels a lot more like the aftermath of something. I decided to end off on Dust because I had previously explored it in a different context, as a part of my analysis of the Interloper series. While doing so, I ended up scaring myself half to death just from some ambient rock sounds. What the fuck? Honestly, Dust felt very much like the previous maps, for the same reasons. The emptiness, the environment in disrepair, the sound design, etc. But something came to me while I was wandering here that I hadn't thought of before. There was an element of tension here that I couldn't quite place. I realized that it was because of the map's layout and design. Being a map created for a first-person shooter, Dust is designed with choke points and sightlines in mind. I think, especially if you've actually played matches on this map, which I have, this creates a certain amount of tension when turning corners or walking through choke points. You're expecting to see someone suddenly turn that corner, or that someone's hiding just behind that bit of cover. It's not even necessarily conscious, it's just something in the back of your brain telling you to be careful. In a way, it's similar to those monsters I kept expecting to see in the sewers of the other maps, but slightly more subtle.
Exploring these source maps serves as a great example of the types of feelings and phenomena we're looking at through this digital Urbex experiment. Players have been saying they feel this sense of canopsia, even if that's not the exact word they use, forever. And I think allowing ourselves to look at it through this lens can give us a lot of insight as to why that is and what we might want to look out for in future games we explore. And within my experience here, I think I can give two great examples of how this ghost of place concept can appear in the virtual world.
First is the sound design. One of the core ideas posited by Bell in his description of the ghosts of place is how we may feel connected to, or in some way the presence of, those who were in this place before us. To be clear, he's not referring to an actual supernatural ghost, but using the language of ghosts and hauntings to explore why we can often feel a sort of presence in places, even when we're alone. Who has not experienced that flood of images of people long gone, or people when they were younger, while revisiting an old haunt, as we say? For instance, in an empty diner or bar, you may imagine or even sense its past inhabitants. The patrons who would have dined here, the musicians on the stage. What many of these source maps do with their sound design is pull these images from our imagination and give them a sort of ghostly presence in the form of actual sounds that can be heard, despite there being nobody actually there. The other way source maps tend to create this sense of presence is with their map design. For roleplay servers like Downtown and Industrial 17, their emptiness and open space emphasizes the absence of other people. And I think the absence of these things tell just as much of a story to us as the things we do see. It tells us there used to be people here, and now they're gone. It tells us nobody has been here for a long time, and that implies something to us. Maybe it's an unseen danger, maybe it's just the sad story of a place at the end of a slow decline, like a dead mall. What's so interesting is that all of this is kind of incidental. These design decisions were made with the intention of leaving room for players, and yet they seem to have an opposite effect on the atmosphere of the place when we're here alone. Another way the designs of these maps do this is by implying a presence that may not actually be there. A map where we're expecting players just around every bend, or an atmosphere that just screams, something bad is going to pop out any second now. Our expectations for a place can inform the ghosts we feel or imagine there. As an example from Bell, who has not had that slightly chilly and yet very warm feeling of almost being able to see your friends from when you were 8 dashing down the sidewalk as you walk through the neighborhood where you grew up?
What exploring these maps did for me was confirm my theory that these same experiences we see discussed in the real world can and do occur in the digital world too. There is something to this whole digital urbexing thing. With that boost of confidence, let's move on to our next bit of virtual exploration: Minecraft.
I want to throw in a quick disclaimer. I've provided the link to as many of these servers I was able to keep track of in the sources document, but there are a couple here and there that I think may be especially vulnerable to griefing that I've made the decision not to share the IPs for now. Of course, something like an anarchy server is fair game, and some of these have either been talked about publicly before or have good griefing protections, but there are a couple here that I would just hate to see destroyed. I'm just trying to be as responsible as I can, so I hope that you can at least understand. It's probably just my old-fashioned Urbex traditions, trying to keep spots safe. If anyone is interested in finding servers to explore for yourself though, I encourage it. The best way of doing so is to search Minecraft server listing websites, especially ones which will give you weekly stats. Anything that's online but hasn't had players in 2 weeks or more might be interesting. Anyway.
Minecraft is the game that sparked this whole idea for me in the first place. Back in September, some friends and I went looking for dead or empty Minecraft servers to explore. I believe initially inspired by something I came across making that last Minecraft horror video. After searching server listings for a half hour or so, we found one. An empty Russian 1.4.7 anarchy server, which hadn't had player activity in weeks. Now at the time, we were just doing this for fun, so I didn't think to record any of it. After escaping the usual chaos of TNT craters and pitfalls you expect from a Minecraft anarchy spawn, it was surprisingly peaceful. We found this quaint little hotel with signs left by other players, leaving their username and the date of their message, dating back a few years. We found a really unsettling system of underground tunnels 1 by 2, completely unlit and stretching as far as the render distance would show. Unfortunately, after tracking down the IP several months later, I found it was no longer online. The only pieces of it I have left are a few scattered screenshots. In this one, you can see the view from the roof of the hotel, with messages left by other players, including me. Another, you can see me exploring the spooky underground tunnel system, specifically where it connected to a mine shaft. And here, you can see where I found a single piece of white wool in a snowy biome. It was here, while playing this server, that I first realized that same feeling I've experienced while wandering dead malls or abandoned apartments, stores, and restaurants can be found exploring the virtual world. And this makes sense, especially in a game like Minecraft.
Every structure is the story of the person who built it. Every item in a chest, every player's mine, every block that's been placed was placed by an actual person who played this game, built something within it, and in the end, left a piece of themselves behind, a footprint in this digital space. And these worlds are not usually prone to the same kind of decay as physical spaces are, and their ability to withstand time is what makes them especially good at generating this canopsia. It allows these places to be perfect snapshots, void of the people who built or inhabited them. Exploring these worlds, though virtual, can be just as striking as wandering an abandoned building or exploring somewhere after hours.
So I couldn't help myself but try to find and explore more.
And I found a good few, some of which I explored on my own, some I had friends exploring with me. I focused mainly on survival servers, because I think those are usually the more interesting to delve into, finding individual bases, mines, the leftovers of people actually playing the game in the environment. But I also found a couple creative worlds and servers that seem to be building off their own game modes or mods. I was also really into finding old servers, either old versions of the game or servers that had been around a long time. So I found a few that were running the beta versions and some that had been around since the early 2010s, because I do think history and nostalgia play a big part in these ghosts of place and canopsia feelings. So let's dive into the first one. When I loaded into this server, the sun was just disappearing behind the horizon, and Key was playing in the background. Just ahead of me, I could see a campfire and a house. Heading over to the safety of the light and shelter in front of me, I stop to read some scattered signs and find they have some pretty ominous messages for me. Leave now. There's the ruins of a perhaps unfinished crop farm here, but I can't admire the scenery for too long as enemies quickly start overwhelming me. Rushing into the house, I see another of these vaguely threatening signs just outside the door. Inside, I don't find it much safer and panic trying to get out before the creeper blows up. The rules I have for these explorations follow the standard urbexing rules as close as I can. When it comes to player structures, leave it as you found it. I do end up dying to a skeleton, and trying to explore a bit further, I come across this grave. This place is creepy, man. Deciding I should probably be a little better equipped for nighttime exploration, I head out into the forest to get some wood, and then cower in the corner of this smaller house to build some tools. Inside, I find some more of these leave now signs, and one reading, I destroyed your houses, signed ? Nearby, there's a marker for a mine, so I descend the ladder and find a decent little cave system, which leads out into this kind of cleared out water pool. While watching this back, I heard this weird clicking sound while I was underwater here. If anyone has any idea what this is, let me know, because it freaked me out when I first heard it. Upon some more exploration, I didn't find much else. A crafting table in the side of a mountain, some torches, things like that. I have to admit, this is one of the creepier servers I explored. Spawning into the darkness, the empty, partially griefed buildings, and these oddly ominous signs. I felt like I was living through the start of a Minecraft creepypasta. Aside from these eerie details though, I didn't see much else. Let's look at another server. One of the first servers I found was this German medieval world where you start in this ship at port. The builds here were incredible, but it appeared to have never been finished. Whatever custom game mode and rules they seemed to be planning weren't active, it was just running regular survival. Some areas were outlined where I assumed they were planning to build more, and most of the rooms were empty. Still, as I continued wandering through the paths and further into the kingdom that was built here, I was more and more impressed. The towering castle walls, incredible architecture, and it just kept going and going. There was so much to see. Many of these rooms I expect would have been able to be reserved by players and customized, at least that's the vibes I got from them, as they all looked like the same bedroom template. Even with much of it still clearly a work in progress or left unfinished, there were so many little touches. This dusty cobweb-filled attic, this chest of starting loot with a nice little message. Exploring a massive castle like this, completely empty, is a surreal experience. Now, of course, you could always download a map like this on your own, but something about knowing this was at one point an active server, meant to be filled with all sorts of players for whatever roleplay or RPG game mode they had in store, adds that extra layer. For abandoned digital worlds, it's more than just a place being empty. It's the knowledge that it was intended to be occupied. It's been left alone, but there's a server running somewhere waiting for someone to join it. And a place like this that was so clearly intended for so many players on such a large scale, despite it not quite being the survival worlds I'm usually looking for, as this was more than likely built in creative mode and with other tools, it definitely carried a certain weight while exploring. Aside from just these castle towers and residential housing, I did end up stumbling upon some more interesting builds. Massive empty halls yet to be decorated, the torches inside barely enough to light the space, leaving it dim and gloomy like an empty hotel ballroom. Even weirder, just outside the walls of the kingdom, we found that a bunch of the trees here were missing their leaves, all on the same side. Of course, our first thought was the obvious connection to Herobrine, and even without the connection to the creepypasta, it's just a strange visual. While we were out here, we ended up finding a whole other region to the map, some kind of farmland. There were these massive fields of wheat, which looked so cool. I was once again surprised with the scale of this place, and this area seemed mostly complete. The barns were stocked with animals, and there were even these cool little ships at port. After leaving a little sign marking that I'd been here, I decided to move on from this server for now. The next server I want to look at is the first one I recorded footage of, an anarchy server I initially found, I think, while watching videos about abandoned Minecraft servers. I should also mention here that, being the first one we recorded, I didn't quite have the OBS settings figured out yet, and this footage has some issues with artifacting and compression, so bear with me. Anyway, there were a few other players on when my friends and I explored it, but we rarely bumped into anyone. After leaving the safety of the glass pyramid at spawn, we were met with tons of massive cobblestone walls and towers snaking up into the clouds. So our first order of business was trying to climb these, which we accomplished with varying degrees of success. Moving past the walls around spawn, we stumbled upon one of my favorite discoveries I've made while making this video. Tons and tons of these signs, all marking the deaths of different players, how they died and when. It seems like this is some kind of plugin the server uses, and they date back a long time, most of them from 2012, over a decade ago. And these ravines were just filled with them. These signs were a highlight of this server for sure, as clear a footprint left by other players as you could get. But this world had even more in store for us. At first, there was a lot of just wandering, but eventually we found a little town with messages left much more recently, this year, including one simply saying, "So empty." From what I can tell, this server is fairly old and has seen a substantial dip in players from its peak. Still, there's a small group of active players, I think at least in part because of some of the other videos made about it being an abandoned server. So there are a good number of signs and messages left more recently. In fact, at one point we figured out that some invisible player was actually stalking us, and it turned out they were going around collecting signatures from other players, putting together almost a guest book. In return, they gave us some items and we were on our way again. Very cool interaction. Like I said, this server was very clearly, at one point, really active, so there were tons of ruins and seemingly abandoned builds. But the thing that would end up completely consuming us as we played was discovering this road. Spanning from 0-0, it moves up the z-axis for we don't really know how long. We never got to the end. We spent hours and hours over multiple days from here on out just following this road. This had clearly become some kind of centerpiece for the server, as the road was surprisingly well kept. There were refuel stations with crops to take and replant, signs left by the people building, and others who were marking their progress as they followed it. And I mean no exaggeration when I say hours. I have literally 5 hours of footage of us playing here, the majority of which is just this road. And that's just what we recorded. To be fair though, we didn't spend the entire time marathoning down the road. There were tons of sights to see on the way. Bases and caves just off the path, and cool monuments to various milestones along the road, ranging from signs congratulating us for making it this far to entire structures, the highlight of which was definitely the 10,000 milestone, but we'll get to that. After a long while and the road unfolding further and further, we reached the shore of the landmass we'd been on, and the path extended into the ocean. From here on, we didn't hit land again aside from the odd island here and there. Otherwise, it was just us, some cobblestone, and the ocean, with a few refuel stations scattered along the way. After hours of walking, we made it to 10K and found this really beautiful garden of trees. We weren't ready to call it yet. We walked for multiple more hours across a whole other day. The road slowly became smaller, shrinking from 3 blocks to 2 to 1. In the end, we made it to just over 16K before deciding to take a break. This server was definitely one of my favorites of this entire video. And the thing that stuck with me the most was how dedicated this small group of players still was. As we made our way through the server and along the road, we kept seeing familiar names leaving signs behind. People who had been here before us, doing the exact same thing. Though there was clearly a lot of history to this server, I think the ghost of place I felt strongest here were all the players who had come to visit it just like we had, and how they had made their way along the same road we were now walking, like they were guiding us. This next server seems to date all the way back to 2011, and is still only running 1.7.9. Spawning in, there was a fairly expansive hub, with tons of builds and a detailed set of rules and teleporters. We decided to start in the jungle. We found this little stone house with some friendly no trespassing signs. Nobody was home though, so teehee. There was also this massive high dive which fell all the way to bedrock, but then we got stuck at the bottom, so... On to the next. The grass biome seemed to have more builds right away. Like the last area, most of them in varying levels of disrepair. The saddest was probably this tiny little house with a message left from a player telling other players to feel free to take some of the items, while the house itself was now barren with broken windows and walls. On a similar note, almost every chest not locked with a magic spell was completely empty. People had picked this place clean. The ruined nature of these builds ended up being a pretty big obstacle while exploring, falling through floors and letting monsters in. One of the coolest builds here was this cactus and leaf house, the basement of which was filled with monsters. It took a good while to clear them out enough to actually slow down and get a closer look, but when we finally did, I noticed something. In this one room, there was the sound of a chicken, but where is it coming from? The mystery of this disembodied sound gripped me so much that I ended up breaking my biggest rule. I started just mining into the walls. I was determined to find this chicken, and almost immediately I found them. These chickens just came spilling out of this little hidden nook behind the walls. I honestly felt a little bad because I couldn't corral them back in, and I did break one of the core urbexing rules, so I don't recommend doing this, but at least I freed them from their stony prison. On top of that though, I noticed I could only find one of the 2 chickens who had come out. Where had it? Oh no. R.I.P. After a brief look around some of the other areas, we had to leave for the time being. Despite much of the builds here being in disrepair, the fact that the server had been running for so long added a lot to the experience. Who knows how long those chickens had been living in those walls? This was one of the only servers I found running a pre-release version of the game. It was created somewhat recently, as a part of this recent revival of players preferring older versions of the game, and it still seemed like some players hopped on now and then. But when I joined, it was completely empty. The spawn area was pretty big. There's something really charming about the way builds in these earlier versions look, the textures, the limited blocks, lots of stone, wood, glass, and glowstone. It's pretty nostalgic, and this world really did feel like a bit of a snapshot into the past. This starting area seemed pretty well kept, but I did stumble across this closed shop. Not being one to let a no trespassing sign stop me, I ended up finding a break in the glass and sneaking in. Something about the way this place was lit, in addition to the way I gained access to it in the first place, really reminded me of actual urbexing, like hopping into an abandoned shopping mall through a window. It's something I'm not entirely unfamiliar with, so I get this weird sense of digital deja vu almost while exploring here. Wanting to see more than just the spawn area, I started wandering out and was met almost immediately with these massive pillars of water in the skyline. It was a pretty cool visual, almost like something you'd expect to see at the end of the world. A sign nearby read, "Ultimate Water Pillar, Birthplace of All." So of course, I swam to the top. Outside the houses that were nearby, I found these graves for Bean and Bill the chicken. I know that loss, man. It was also cool to see a lot of these signs where players were leaving little notes for each other. I also found this little cactus farm here, so that was cool. Later, I found this massive tower, I assume a hotel, which extended all the way up through the clouds. The view here was pretty cool, but I was not about to take the ladder all the way back down. Spotting a small pool of water by these crops, I found my exit. Lining up my jump, I perfectly threaded the needle and I ended up closing out my exploration here shortly after finding this giant cobblestone statue of Steve with torches for the eyes. In the darkness of night, it looked a little ominous, but I was just thankful to find a source of light. This next server is perhaps the strangest thing I encountered this entire video. It was running on a relatively new version of the game, but the listing I found on it was 13 years old. This thing has been around for a while. Loading in, the spawn was a little underwhelming. Some scattered torches and chests, but not much else. Wandering out a bit further though, you'll find this massive chunk error. Jumping down to the bottom, it looks crazy, but a little ways from the sheer cliff, there's this little structure made of dirt, and inside this structure is a staircase. This staircase leads to an insane series of tunnels. It's like a maze, extending out in all directions, sometimes leading to dead ends, sometimes cutting out into these massive ravines where you can see other branches of this strange tunnel system. Eventually, you'll come across a tree, all the way down here, and then another. This whole system of tunnels is permeated by these rooms of trees. There seems to be no other utility or reason for these rooms or tunnels to exist. Who built this? Why? With seemingly no reason for its existence, who put all the time and resources into this mysterious series of rooms and underground halls? On top of that, I never found much evidence of any kind of permanent homestead, a place where the players who built this would store their items or anything. It's like this place just came into existence. Eventually, we found that one of these pathways led into some kind of castle, once again filled with trees. Outside, there were some signs from other players who also discovered this place when looking for old servers. We left some of our own as well. Inside this fortress of trees, there's a fountain that actually descends even further into the earth, all the way to bedrock actually. And even all the way down here, there doesn't seem to be much except rooms, halls, and trees. One of the strangest rooms is the one all the way at the bottom, below the water. There are all these doorways as if they're supposed to lead somewhere, but it's just deep slate. I explored this place for a long while, but found almost exclusively more of the same. Tunnels, hallways, rooms, almost entirely empty except for a tree here or there. I really have no explanation for this place, but it was incredibly odd, almost eerie wandering through it. At one point, I did find this Enderman stuck in some blocks. Who knows how long he's been there. But after a while, I found myself circling back to the same places I'd been before, so I decided I'd explored enough and disconnected for now.
So for the end of this section, I just wanted to run down some smaller discoveries I made on servers I found. Servers that didn't have a lot to discuss, but one or two little things I think were worth mentioning.
First, there was this server I found which, unlike the rest, seemed to actually just be a server for a few friends. Most of the others seemed to have been pretty widely populated at one point, and welcoming to new players, but exploring this place, I don't know, something about it almost felt like breaking and entering. It was pretty small, but this was really the only place I felt genuinely nervous exploring. Like I was seeing stuff I wasn't supposed to. Don't get me wrong, it was just a public server listing, but I don't know. The vibes were off. Part of it could also be that one of the server messages I saw while I was in here immediately spit a homophobic slur at me, so was not necessarily looking forward to running into other players if one happened to join while I was on here. And again, it just gave off the vibe of a more personal server, not like a place I should have been able to explore. Then there was this server which I believe started on an older version of the game using the classic Gargamel seed. The version has been updated since then, but it's the same world, and I think it was worth exploring just for all the cool pre-release style builds. But the thing that caught my eye the most when I first joined it to scope it out was something I didn't catch on video. Right here by the Nether portal, there were dozens, maybe close to 100 zombie pigmen just crowded over here. It was insane. Not only was it something crazy to see, it also spoke to how long the server had been running without people checking on it. The NPCs of the game just slowly entering the Nether portal and filing into the overworld. When I joined later to get footage though, they were gone. But I do have evidence that this happened because going into the Nether reveals, yep, there they all are. Wild. There were also a couple servers I found which still had people's pets in them, and I don't know, every time I ran into them it was a little sad. Just another of these little things you find while exploring and stick with you. The final server I want to shout out is this beta anarchy server. It just had the craziest spawn of anything I explored here, though this is pretty par for the course with anarchy servers. It was a whole journey just to escape the main spawn and get past these massive stone and lava walls. Anyway, I thought it was cool.
Minecraft, I think, is probably the perfect game for this kind of digital urbexing. Being a sandbox game, every build and structure that you can find was one made by a player with some kind of intentionality. And to me, that's different than a developer creating a world. The way a person augments the world around them to build something to fit their needs of survival or entertainment, is much closer to the environment we see in real life. And being a sandbox game, our ability to explore these places is greatly increased. You're free to go anywhere you'd like, explore any place you see. Welcome back to the cyber world. This is what we call the Nexus Point. My name's Viper, but they call me the Switch. I'm the best hacker in this place. If you want to support these videos, you can at patreon.com/SaganHawks. We've got all the music I make for these videos for free, behind the scenes, early access, commentary tracks, and a lot more. All of this at only $2 a month. So if you like what I do and you have a few bucks to spare, feel free to head on over. Anyway, back to the meat space. Anyway, on to Roblox. Roblox is a game I played a lot of growing up, and it was one of the major ways I interacted with my friends online. Whether it was visiting each other's places to see how we had decorated and to play each other's games, or trying to survive in the apocalyptic world of Dead Zone or the intense airborne battlefield of Jet Wars. As I got older, we mostly moved on to other avenues of multiplayer gaming, though I won't deny hopping on to play Doors or something every now and then. Roblox, especially that early 2010s era, has continued to be a source of fond memories and experiences for me, but has become almost unrecognizable in more recent years. It was never perfect, don't get me wrong, but I don't remember it ever being as mobile gamey as it is now when I was a kid. There are some projects keeping this old era of Roblox alive though.
Groups like the Archive and Classic Restoration have done something really cool and salvaged as many old Roblox worlds as they can, upkeeping and hosting them so that they can be revisited exactly as they were back in the day. So I've gone through some of these archived worlds and picked a few that looked particularly interesting to me. Let's take a look. The first world I looked at was JJ5X5's house from 2009. JJ5X5 was a figure of some renown in the old days of Roblox, producing some pretty popular videos like Roblox Gone Crazy. This house was exactly the type of thing I was looking for. Though more formalized games can be fun, something created more personally like this is way more interesting for digital urbexing. There's a lot more personality in it. Entering in, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia. The old textures, the way things were built back then, people actually having their place be a house. Entering the house, one of the first things I noticed was this weird shadow on the ground. It looked almost like another player, but it's probably nothing. The TV showed off a screenshot of JJ5X5 with a paintball gun, and the walls were adorned with wonderfully dated memes. Along two of the other walls, there were face changers, including equally dated memes like the Shoop da Whoop face. Moving into the kitchen, there were givers for Bloxy Cola and pizza, absolutely classic. Into the backyard, there was this weird little rock formation with a beware of falling sign. Did I mention this whole house is at the top of a giant mountain? In the garage, I found a working car that I almost immediately tumbled off the cliff. Moving upstairs, there's a bathroom, and the water in the toilet and bathtub destroys your limbs. This is bringing back memories for sure. Walking around is just a torso. In the next room, there's the blank figure of Lego Kid. So that's what was making the shadow. Lego Kid was a popular model that JJ5X5 actually created. I pushed it around for a bit and decided to reset my model by throwing myself off the mountain. Coming back, I noticed I actually placed Lego Kid in a pretty creepy position, just a dark figure peering at me from the doorway. Also upstairs, there was a bedroom with a computer, more photos of JJ5X5's character, and a little bed and couch. Most interesting to me, which I was saving for last, was the room just off the kitchen. The door here is blocked with a restricted area, authorized employees only sign. I figured this is probably an admin room, containing stuff that only JJ5X5 wanted to have access to. And moving the camera over the door, you can get a view inside and see some different givers, one for a paintball gun. I wanted that paintball gun, and I've never let a little no trespassing sign stop me before. So I begin looking for exploits to get inside, searching for how to no-clip or glitch through walls in Roblox, and I found what I was looking for with Alex Kaboom's video, How to Laugh Clip in Roblox 2024, a video explaining an exploit you can use to pop through walls. So shout out Alex Kaboom. But here's the thing, this exploit takes practice, precise timing, and according to Alex Kaboom, only really works for walls 1 stud thick. Was this wall even thin enough? Would I be able to actually pull this off? Well, after practicing for a bit, I was actually able to do it. Let's go! Huh, it looks like JJ5X5 accounted for this. As soon as I entered the room, my character died. But not all hope is lost. I noticed that I actually only died once I touched the ground, and with my brief glimpse inside, I was able to see there's actually one of these paintball givers right next to the wall. If I could get in and jump just right, I may be able to actually land on one of these and avoid certain death, the floor is lava style. After many, many attempts, I landed it. And from here, I could claim my prize, a paintball gun. Let's go, an illegal firearm. And I knew that against one of these other walls was the hallway, so I could get out pretty easily. The paintball gun seemed a little broken, but it was worth the effort nonetheless. After that, I took another look around and didn't find much of anything else. I did see some items way up in the sky, but after trying and failing to get on the roof, I didn't really see a realistic way of getting anywhere near enough to even make out what they were. Either way, this was a very cool first place to explore. Let's look at another. This is actually a world also created by JJ5X5, a popular theme park, taken from sometime in 2010. Who could say no to an abandoned theme park? It was here that I really began to remember how far Roblox has really come. I guess I just almost forgot that this is what most games looked like back in the day. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but I guess more childlike, less slick and polished. And man, it's been a while since I've seen a message that looked like one of these. After taking a ride on a few of the roller coasters, I headed for the hotel. There was a really weird amount of violence and murder in this place. I don't know what was up with that. Anyway, inside the hotel, we got some charming classic Roblox dialogue from some NPCs. The old culture of Roblox really shines here in the way people talk and write. But most interesting to me, I found some rooms that actually had player names on them. These were rooms somewhat customized for specific players, and I don't know, there's something about that feels strange now, exploring them so many years later, empty. It really does give some intense Urbex vibes. I looked up a few of these usernames and they are old, like 2007, very early Roblox. Many of these rooms were basically the same inside, but some had unique posters and little decorations. This one had a zombie. And then there was JJ5X5's very own personal suite. Very spacious, the benefits of building the place. Exploring a bit of the rest of the hotel, like the pool, there was something strange to the atmosphere. There was zero ambient sound, and all the NPCs were, as was typical with old Roblox games, just statues with text above them. But it gave a certain frozen in time quality to the place that felt a little odd. The next place I decided to check out was the Iron Cafe from 2009. It seemed to have a bit of a Christmas theme going, so perfect for this time of year. Walking inside, there was all this low-res confetti everywhere. Odd interior design choice. There was a menu, but with no one behind the counter, I moved downstairs. Here was where the real parties must have happened. A dance floor, a stage, a bar. I found some instruments and decided to give a bit of a performance for nobody. I have to admit, there's something very cozy about the Iron Cafe here, even when nobody was around. It was so clearly built as a really social place, a place for people to come together, make new friends, or chat with old ones. It really spoke to how I remember Roblox back in this era, a really fun and social place. Being here alone all these years later with the cafe stuck in this seasonal form, especially coming up near an actual Christmas, it made me reflect a bit. How even though it's still my favorite time of year, it just doesn't feel the same as it did when I was a kid. It made me think about those Decembers as a child, worrying about very little and what I did worry about not actually mattering all that much. The Iron Cafe is actually still up and running to this day, continuing to be updated, but this snapshot into its past was definitely an interesting visit.
Playing through these old Roblox games, I felt probably the most acute nostalgia of anything I played this whole video. This was such a massive part of my childhood that I was able to recognize all the little quirks and design choices which I haven't thought about in years but immediately came back to me when confronted with them. Above all, I came away feeling like this early era of Roblox was very much about fun.
You could see it in the dated but goofy sense of humor of the late 2000s and 2010s that Roblox had, the more messy but personal way things were built, how players' personalities shined through, and how socializing was such a big component. I think this era of Roblox really reminds me of the little sliver of time when online gaming for kids was really just about fun and socializing with other kids.
Many of Roblox's peers in online gaming are gone, like Club Penguin or Toontown, and Roblox itself has matured into a more contemporary game platform, with higher standards and a lot of talent clearly on display, but also more monetized and exploitative. I mean, of course old Roblox had elements of these things even back then, but it's very clearly a different place than it used to be. And playing through these old worlds, these snapshots in time, I think the ghost of place I felt most was the last era of the internet before the chokehold of algorithmic children's entertainment truly took over. A place where kids actually could just be creative and have fun on the internet. As a kid, browser games were my absolute jam, somewhat by necessity. It wasn't until I got a bit older that I made a Steam account and started using my allowance to buy games for myself. So before then, aside from a few PC games we had for the whole family, I was relegated to the wonderful world of web-based video gaming. And one of the websites I remember just as vividly as Armor Games or Miniclip was Maid Marian.
Maid Marian was a website created by Gene Endrody, where he hosted a variety of his own games, most notably Sherwood Dungeon, an early browser MMORPG that I played a lot growing up. There were also a variety of other multiplayer games, which I also remember playing, like Club Marian and Moonbase. I spent a lot of my 45 minutes of computer time back in the day just wandering around these places, at a time when video games felt like something truly special, when seeing a digitized world realized with buildings and forests and populated with people was exciting and novel, when my knowledge of exactly what video games were capable of and how they worked was limited, leading my imagination to run wild with possibilities that could lie within this virtual world.
As more modern browser games and multiplayer experiences came out over the years, Maid Marian's popularity stagnated, and when support for Flash was dropped by almost every browser, most of the games on Maid Marian were rendered unplayable, with the exception of Sherwood Dungeon, which became a standalone game you could download via the website. Years of memories and player experiences completely wiped out overnight. Well, almost completely. Thanks to the incredible archival community that sprang up after the announcement of Flash's ending support, the games of Maid Marian are still available through the Flashpoint archive. However, their servers are still down, so the best we can do is explore these once occupied worlds alone.
Club Marian is described on the website as a massive multiplayer social hangout. Essentially, a chat room in 3D space with character avatars.
I was especially interested to check this one out because it was the one I didn't play quite as much. It felt too grown up for me, just a bunch of people talking about stuff I didn't understand, and I was never one to chat in online games anyway. So I was interested to see what the game was like outside of just my very vague memories.
To start, you create a character with some pretty basic options. After creating your avatar, you're dropped into the game. I remember some of this. I remember driving the car, the tropical island theme. What I didn't remember was how insane the controls were. The character moves really fast, and the sensitivity when looking around is so intense it'll give you whiplash. I also didn't remember the sky, which was this cloudy atmosphere of shifting colors. It was almost nauseating. I believe the speed and sensitivity issues are caused by the fact that I'm using newer hardware, but I'm not entirely sure. Checking on the menu, there are a few different options, one showcasing different islands to explore, another linking to Sherwood Dungeon, and another which I didn't remember at all. The music maker. Though fairly rudimentary, it does allow you to put together some dance music to listen to in the background. So I threw something together and danced for a bit. Exploring some of the other islands available, it was pretty clear there wasn't a huge difference between them. Some would be snowy, some would be of a slightly different style, but for the most part they all had the same layout. A few did stand out though, like this giant empty coliseum. It's places like this that bring to mind how many players there would have been when these servers were active, filling up all this space. And by contrast, how empty and lifeless this place feels now. Another of these standout maps was Stonehenge, which just felt strangely out of place. The other worlds are mostly filled with buildings or vaguely social looking places, so there just being an ancient monument here with club music playing in the background was odd. There is something really anxiety inducing about Club Marian. The constant changing and rotating lights in the sky, the insane speed and camera sensitivity, the jankiness of the controls, especially in the car, and the perpetual club music playing in the background which never seems to loop quite right. Like I said, it feels nauseating. Couple that with it being completely empty, and it feels like a nightmare or fever dream. And I mean that in the most direct sense. There's a really surreal, feverish quality to the atmosphere. And I think the fact that the game was going for an almost dance hall vibe makes it even stranger that it's empty. The music and wide open spaces that were clearly intended to be filled up. It makes it feel like wandering around a sleazy club after hours.
Moonbase was a similar social hub game, just with a different aesthetic. And I have some very fond memories of Moonbase. For the longest time, I had this game and Moonbase Alpha combined in my head as the same game, but that is not the case. Moonbase on Maid Marian is much smaller in scale, but still very interesting in its own right, at least from my memory. I remember kicking a little earth beach ball around and being really excited about being able to drive the little moon buggy around. Most of all, I remember always wanting to be able to make it to the earth with my jetpack. Maybe I can fulfill that childhood dream now.
Hopping in here, there are less options right off the bat. No other maps, no real way to customize your character. Still, I think this game has a lot more charm than Club Marian. You're just an astronaut who can dance. Sick. It does have some of the same issues as Club Marian with movement and sensitivity. He is not taking one small step, he is sprinting. You can see the earth in the sky just as I remembered, but the little earth beach ball took my more immediate attention. There really isn't much to explore here. The buggy is fun to drive around even with how insane it is to control. There's really only one structure, and that's essentially just 2 platforms. And that's pretty much it. I knew I had to try getting to the Earth though. I had to make that childhood dream come true. So I leapt off the moon into the starry sky. Missed again. Would I ever accomplish this long-awaited childhood dream? Yeah. Pretty quickly, honestly. It was cool to finally do this, but a little anticlimactic, honestly, because it was way easier than I thought it was going to be. From here on the Earth, it becomes even more obvious how small the game really is. Despite its attempts to appear like a genuine view into the infinity of space, the facade of the night sky and the Earth are pretty obvious, honestly, even just looking at it from the surface of the moon. But that adds an interesting extra dimension to this game. Maybe if it looked more real, it would feel more like actually being alone in the void of space, but instead it feels like theater, like being on the set of the Kubrick-directed moon landing. It's really interesting, but again, there really was barely anything here to see, so after diving into the endless void of space, I moved on.
So, on to Sherwood Dungeon. Or maybe just Sherwood? I'm not sure. There's like multiple different versions with different names. I always just called it Sherwood Dungeon. It is the game I definitely have the most memories of playing, even though I don't think I ever got very far in it. I mostly just found it fun to wander around the spawn area, fighting enemies and exploring. I grew up watching my older sister play Morrowind, and I remember wanting to be able to play a fantasy-type RPG game and thinking of Sherwood Dungeon as sort of my Morrowind. This was the only game that was technically still available, with servers still running. You just have to download it now.
I started with the base version of the game, the one that seemed the most up to date. It was familiar, but clearly things had changed a bit. The combat and menus were slightly different, and so were some of the controls. Still, I remembered it all too well. The pirate ship where I spent a lot of time as a kid just being like, whoa, I hope it sets sail and takes me somewhere cool. The tiny little Viking men, the giant spiders, all the combat animations, the giant dragon statue near the teleporters. There were a couple other players on at this time, but the game clearly did not get as many visitors as when I last played. I decided to head into the dungeon and actually try playing the game, because as a kid I remember only really peeking in here once or twice and then getting scared. It was, kind of fun. Mostly just holding down 2 buttons. It got boring fast, and I missed the old version I had played growing up. But I had noticed a button on the menu which said Sherwood Classic, so I decided to try exploring there. This is what I remember. In all honesty, not much was actually different, but seeing the old menus and little details back to how I remembered them hit me with a wave of nostalgia. This version also seemed harder than the newer one because I almost immediately died. I made my way to some of the usual spots, like the windmill, which I remember always hoping they'd update to let you go inside. I decided to try checking out some of the other areas here and found that they were almost entirely the same maps as the ones in Club Marian, just with enemies running around. The tropical islands, Stonehenge, and the Colosseum. I was glad to see them without all the nauseating lights, but still, it was mostly the same. One of the only new maps I found was this giant chessboard called the Battle Arena. I also did get to see some enemy types I don't remember seeing as much as a kid, like the lions and wolves. Sherwood definitely didn't feel as empty as the others, because I mostly played it without chatting to other players anyway, and there were enough of the NPCs and enemies that it still felt full. The thing that I noticed the most was how much smaller it felt. As a kid, I really did basically just run around this one area and fight the enemies, but it all felt so much bigger, so much more of a journey to walk to the other side of the map. Again, this was when I was really young, so I saw all of this as so much more impressive than it was. And don't get me wrong, at the time this came out, an entirely in-browser, functioning MMORPG was pretty damn impressive. but it all seems so quaint now, and it's funny to think I was so enamored with it at the time, even though I was barely even scratching the surface in the first place.
It was genuinely really interesting revisiting this chapter in my childhood so many years later. I honestly wasn't entirely sure what to expect because it had been so many years, but I'm really grateful to all of the archival efforts in preserving Flash games that have taken place since Flash was discontinued. It can sometimes be as simple as an outdated compatibility that kills games like this, leaving behind only the memories of its players. This is how stuff becomes lost media. So I deeply appreciate all the work projects like the Flashpoint Archive are doing.
Blockland was a bit different for me. Unlike some of the other games I actually played a lot growing up, I never played Blockland, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. For the uninitiated like myself, Blockland is a LEGO-style sandbox building game in the same vein as Garry's Mod or Roblox. Of course, Roblox and Minecraft have both been described as if LEGO was a video game, but stylistically, it's clear Blockland is the closest to a straight LEGO adaptation.
Initially released in 2004, the game includes a lot of tools for building not just structures, but also unique game modes, AI, and more. Again, very much like Garry's Mod or Roblox. Also very much like those games, Blockland allows for multiplayer servers, but unlike Garry's Mod and Roblox, Blockland has not had the staying power of these other games in recent years. Garry's Mod and Roblox still have incredibly active player bases, with hundreds to thousands of active servers and huge communities. Blockland, on the other hand, never seemed to reach the heights of either, even at its peak, and in recent years has only become more niche.
According to the Steam charts, the game's player averages don't often go over 20 per month, and the peaks are rarely over 100. Clearly, there is a small group still invested in consistently playing the game, but it shouldn't be at all difficult to find some empty or abandoned servers. Booting up the game, its age became immediately obvious, as the first thing it asked me was whether I was using dial-up internet. Wanting to hop right into the action, I opened the server browser and found that there were only 4 players online in the whole game, spread out across a couple different servers. The rest were very empty. So I joined the first one that caught my eye, an infinite mining server, figuring there might be tunnels from who knows how long ago.
So this is the first section that I wrote, and I didn't quite leave in any space to put in a title card between servers like I have so far. So yeah, these will be without them for Blockland.
As soon as I loaded in, I was hit with a sort of flashbang, which scared the shit out of me. And then there I was, in a cube of rock and stone, equipped only with a non-functioning spray paint can and a pickaxe. Again, I didn't really know how this game worked, so I went to my options to look at the controls and got sidetracked by creating a character. Finding the most horrifying face I could place on a character, I proceeded to design whoever the hell this guy is. Though I was a little disappointed not to see miles of sprawling caverns in this server, I did find a modest network of tunnels which felt very claustrophobic. There was something about the dim light of my helmet combined with zero sound and perhaps the fact that I was unfamiliar with the game that made it all feel a little odd. After wandering a bit, another player joined, and they immediately just started mining. I said hello, and they said hello back, but I didn't really feel like mining dirt blocks into a wall for all eternity, so I decided to disconnect and look for another server with some more to offer. The next server I tried was called Feet Cinema, and at the time I had no idea what that meant. Perhaps there's a player named Feet who built a movie theater? In hindsight, it should have been pretty obvious. I loaded into what amounted to a series of foot fetish images. There were like a dozen servers with this feet titling, which is crazy, but at least I knew to stay away from them now. After that, I cleansed my palette with this cool roguelike game, which seemed to be in active development. I loved the music and enemy designs, it was a lot of fun. But eventually I decided what I really needed was some kind of free build server. A place where I could find what players were building together, what kind of stories I could discover in their builds, an empty corner of the game that I could explore and experience the ghosts of place in Blockland. So I joined the first free build server that I saw and loaded into a pretty cool spot. Tons of buildings, from fire departments to museums to Greco-Roman temples, which I did initially think were built by players, but I believe this is just a map that comes with the game. There were still some cool bits of pixel art and player builds here and there though. I did find something really odd about the atmosphere of this place though. The sky was dark and there was this constant echoing, almost industrial ambient sound. And as I kept playing, despite being completely alone in the server, I kept hearing weird noises, like blocks being placed or like Minecraft cave sounds. It just felt eerie to be here, almost post-apocalyptic. Wandering the deserted roads, surrounded by shuttered and empty buildings. And even though I hadn't ever really played Blockland, it felt oddly familiar. The large murals of pixel art and random items just outside the main plate. I've seen the same thing dozens of times in free build servers on Gary's Mod and Minecraft. So there was this odd sense of familiarity I had as I explored and thought about all the players who had built this stuff. Now, I was still very unfamiliar with the controls of the game, so I ended up spending a good bit of time here in the beginning just fiddling with options and looking things up. And as I was distracted and not paying attention, this hair-raising metal creaking sound starts playing, and then two players connect. I turn around to see someone walking toward me with a flashlight, which I assume is one of these players, but he just stares at me and doesn't say anything. Call me a scaredy cat if you'd like. This was freaky as hell to me. Trying to break the ice, I say hello, and then what the hell was that? Jesus. Okay, that was loud, but it seems like it was just the world autosaving. And the people in the chat are talking now, and the guy has stopped only looking at me. Alright, geez, let me try saying hi. What the fuck? Fucking hello? What? So it seemed the uneasy atmosphere I had been feeling was not just in my head. The server actually had a horror mod installed, which I'm sure was immediately obvious to those of you who actually did play Blockland growing up. Specifically, this was an implementation of the Renderman creepypasta, which was actually right there in the name of the server, but I never played Blockland. I figured that was just someone's username or something. The Renderman creepypasta is, of course, based on Slenderman, and also seems pretty reminiscent of Herobrine in some ways, an entity who appears in the background of screenshots and videos, which can teleport and stalks the player in their game. Some other effects of Renderman include hearing deep laughter and audio and visual distortions. While I continued exploring, Renderman appeared a few more times and had reverted back to its more recognizable pitch black silhouette with a sinister grin. I think if when I had started, Renderman had been in this standard form, I would have caught on to the fact that it was a horror mod more immediately. But because it looked kind of just like a player, I was just really confused and unsettled, and then completely surprised when it actually jump scared me. Then again, maybe I would have just thought I was living through an IRL creepypasta, who knows. After driving around a bit and perusing more of the empty buildings, pixel art, and struggling to understand the controls some more, I decided I had seen about all there was to see, and started looking for somewhere else to explore. The next place I went was an FPS server called Block Ops, which was fairly small but cool nonetheless. It felt very much like exploring an empty paintball arena. I could just picture all the bloody, blocky battles this arena had seen. Again though, there wasn't much here, so next I tried another free build server. Loading in and exploring the spawn area very briefly, I was almost immediately stuck, and I didn't really understand how. I don't know, I figured I'd broken something. So I reconnected and found myself on the roof of the spawn this time. From here, I could see how much more expansive this server was. Dozens of builds spanning a massive base plate. There would be a lot to explore here. And I think I tried to zoom in, but accidentally hit the third person button, and when I did, I found that I was a horse for some reason. I really don't know why this is the case, but it explained why I got stuck earlier. My model was just really big. Though this is pretty funny, it ended up actually being kind of a massive hindrance because I couldn't fit in any of the doors. Much like the previous free build server, this place reminded me a lot of the free build Minecraft servers I played back in the day. The variety of builds in these places were always so interesting to me. They showcase a lot of personality, both in their own right and that of the builder. Some people want to make a cozy cup of hot chocolate labeled pee poo, others realistic houses and neighborhoods. One of the most striking for me was this diner that was blasting Nightcore Hip to Be Square. There is something a little uncanny about finding an empty diner with music still playing, especially when the song has some morbid connotations.
You like Huey Lewis on the news?
There were so many impressive builds here, like this quaint city street with so much detail in the architecture, though there was a certain dead mall-like quality to it with all the empty storefronts. I found what I think is a miniature render man by this cozy campfire, as well as a rocket launcher, which I was disappointed to find didn't work, though it was understandable why. There was so much to explore, but again, I was really limited by my horse body and didn't know how to change it. So instead, I found myself peering creepily into empty bedroom windows and garages. I couldn't help but think about how horrifying it would be to see a horse circling your home and peering into your windows. Moving on, I zipped around in a McDonald's hot rod for a bit in speed kart racing, but decided I should probably end off on something a little bigger. So I joined a server called Scrim's 930 Stadium. What I found was a giant sports-themed server with basketball courts and mini games, but I was most drawn to this absolutely massive football stadium. I mean, this looked to scale with no details expensed. Wandering the empty bleachers really did feel a little odd. For most people, the only time you'll be in a stadium like this in real life is when it's packed for a game. Seeing it like this, even in its blocky digital appearance, felt like I was coming by when I shouldn't have been. A very acute sense of canopsia. There was so much to explore here, because the stadium wasn't just the seats in the field. There were custom, fully furnished skyboxes with their own themes and little interactables. There were halls and corridors connecting the areas around the stadium, and more utility-focused rooms like the kitchen. I don't know how difficult this would be to build in Blockland compared to something like Minecraft, but I found it pretty impressive. After playing with the stadium organ and shrinking down to the size of a mouse and getting stuck that way in this room, I zipped around the field for a while and decided to call it quits for now.
Blockland was a very unique experience for me. In some sense, I felt more alienated from the whole thing because I didn't really have a history with it and didn't even really know how it worked. But I think that added an extra sense of mystery to the whole thing. In obvious ways, like not knowing about Renderman and getting the absolute shit scared out of me, but also in more subtle ways. With each server, I discovered new things about how the game worked and what it was capable of. But the thing which stood out to me the most was the way exploring these servers revealed an entirely new community to me, and all the quirks and structures built by the players which revealed the personality of that community. For instance, I had never heard of Renderman, but by exploring that server, I was able to learn about this whole story and context surrounding this community meme, both the entity itself and how players reacted to it, interacted with, and incorporated it into their worlds. The ghosts of Blockland that I was able to find weren't just the individual players who built this stuff. It was the ghosts of the game itself, the inside jokes, the creepypastas, all the things which make up the identity of a game which I never played and may fade with time if the player base continues to slowly decline, but that you can still experience simply by hopping into a server and seeing what stories the places inside have to tell. So, we've explored a good handful of games and servers and attained first-hand experiences of what it's like to urbex in the virtual world. What I'd like to do now is use some of that experience to look a little deeper into the phenomenon itself. What exactly is the ghost of place? What is the source of the feeling of canopsia? And how and why do they translate to the digital space? And what's different about these elements in a digital world versus the physical one? To start, let's take a closer look at that ghost of place concept and what Michael Merriford Bell has to say about it.
So what exactly is this ghost of place we've been talking about? At the beginning of the essay, Bell says, "What I am describing is, I believe, a common feature of the human experience of place. The point of this essay is to argue that ghosts, that is, the sense of the presence of those who are not physically there, are a ubiquitous aspect of the phenomenology of place. In other words, that humans commonly experience a sense of presence in places that are not actually occupied by a person. It's not that these places have to be abandoned, but that there's a sense of occupancy or entity or spirit we can feel that belongs not to those who inhabit it, but that is attributed to the place itself. This is where some of those other quotes I read earlier come in, the stuff about that slightly chilly and yet very warm feeling which materializes into a sense of watchful eyes or images of childhood friends. It's a little difficult to explain plainly because it isn't really a physical thing that can be described, it's more of a felt one, so Bell opts to use the terminology of ghosts in order to explain an experience just as ineffable as they are.
Bell argues that this is a part of human social nature, a part of us which makes us interact and experience things in a social, personed way. One example is how we view heirlooms and original copies. Anyone can have a near-perfect reprint of the Mona Lisa in their home, and someone could theoretically offer you an exact replica of a family heirloom. But it's not just about the physical thing, it's about the history we attach to it. It's something immaterial, some non-physical quality to it that makes it feel more important to us, a kind of spirit that we feel inhabits it. The leap from objects to places is then not a far one, that we apply a certain ineffable soul to locations as well.
I should also say that these ghosts don't have to be the ghosts of a person, the way you might feel a piece of a grandparent in something they've passed down to you, although that is a good example. The presence we feel could be a connection to childhood experiences, or a sense of great human achievement, or even a history we don't know but seem to feel is there by how the place looks. And we've discussed here earlier a few good examples of presences you can feel as well. The stories behind builds in Minecraft, the feeling of a monster in the halls of a spooky underground sewer system, the memories of a simpler time on the internet.
Lastly, I think Bell comes to a good conclusion about the odd mix of both nostalgia and melancholy and unease that is often described in the experience of canopsia. We often use the word ghosts to refer to the scary spirits of the unsettled dead. I use the term here in a broader sense of a felt presence that possesses and gives a sense of social aliveness to a place. Ghosts in this broader sense may be unsettled and scary, but they can also be rooted, friendly, and affirming. The ghosts of place may seem uncanny at times, but they are nevertheless a familiar and often homey part of our lives. Okay, so hopefully that clarified a little bit what we're talking about when we say ghosts of place. And Bell has a few explanations for why this phenomenon exists in the first place, chief of which seeming to be something in our social nature. But I'd quickly like to posit some of my own specific explanations for why some of these feelings arise. Specifically, I'd like to focus attention on abandoned and empty places, and places that were created by people, buildings, homes, human-made structures. First, I think the reason abandoned or empty places in particular seem to be so associated with this feeling is because they allow us to interface entirely with the ghost. It becomes just you and the place, no distractions or other inhabitants utilizing the space. Urbex then is, in a way, an exercise of communing with the ghosts of place, a sort of seance.
I think one of the biggest elements to this is also expectation and implication. Architecture isn't random or naturally occurring, it is designed and directed by people for people. A human-made place's very existence implies a human presence, which is something we understand even if we don't really think about it. But the implication of a person is more than just a body in a space, it's a conscious being with intent and a life and a story. And when that place is empty or left abandoned, I think we can feel all the weight of that in people's absence, in a place which they once occupied. The wake of rippling water behind them, the indentation left in the sheets. Or maybe it's the exact opposite. We feel the emptiness, the exhalation of the place after the weight of these people has been lifted, the pressure relieved from the mass of their beings and identities. Even if we have never been to a place before it was empty, even if we never knew any of these people and who they are, we know they were here. So I think there's something inherent to abandoned places that imply and evoke the people who inhabited it. The alternative to this would be altogether more unsettling, that a place simply appeared, entirely devoid of human presence and origin, yet somehow a perfect reflection or imitation of one, an apparition. And who knows, maybe this far more eldritch possibility looms over us as we explore the empty halls, roads, and rooms, an element of obscured dread we can't quite understand but can feel.
So that's what a place implies, a history, a presence of people. There is also a more uneasy element which we've discussed, something like the feeling of being watched or not alone. And here is where I think expectation comes in. I don't think this sense of feeling watched in abandoned places is exactly the same as the fear of, for instance, a predator. It's not just the woods or darkness could be hiding something.
As I said, a place is built for people. Its existence is suited not just to their needs in a larger sense, but tailored to the specific needs of the human body. The height of a door frame, or a shelf, or a door handle, an even floor to walk on. So we're naturally inclined to expect to see them here, using everything which was purpose designed for them. So when we can't see them, it may imply to us that they are here, they're just somewhere unseen. Or perhaps a darker undertone to this line of thought could be that we can see that people are meant to be here, so what happened to them? Why are they all gone? Is there something dangerous, even sinister, which I am not privy to, which drove them away, or worse? Not that all of this is happening consciously, but that the situation creates tension for us because of these underlying factors.
Briefly, I also think I should bring up liminal spaces. It's a term that I think most will agree is a little overused, but I do think it actually applies here, in the traditional sense of the word, a place of or in transition. Abandoned places are in the middle of a shift between the natural world and the human-built one, places in decline, between their height and their eventual end. And the imagery may call to mind liminal experiences with places. Classrooms empty because of summer break, empty childhood bedrooms yet to be cleared out or redecorated. Again, these places are meant to be inhabited by people, and when a place is firmly settled, it often is occupied by people. When they're empty, it signifies something about their state, and that might be a state of change.
This takes us to our final point, where we can finally talk about all of this in the context of the virtual world. The first thing we need to understand is that the virtual world is a place. Probably more accurately, they are places. Whether we're talking about a 3D space like a video game or even social media, it may not be physical, it may only appear in text form, but they are places where things happen. Knowing that, it seems to follow that they would be subject to the same kind of social experience and expectations we have with the physical world too. I think the reason it has been less of a part of the conversation is because, all things considered, the internet was fairly new. Coming up on 2025 though, we've now had over 30 years of the internet, and these virtual online spaces have had time to rise and fall and stay fallen for long enough to be interesting to people. You can have decade-old signs in Minecraft servers, or games which would have otherwise been wiped off the face of the earth if not for flash archiving.
There's also been a shift in the prevailing way the internet has been viewed. For the longest time, the idea that everything that happens on the internet stays there forever was the dominant one, that things could never truly be deleted, that the internet was in some way immortal. But with the rise in lost media and these digital places having more and more time to disappear, it's become abundantly clear that that's not really the case. And now, in recent years, it's becoming more common to actually treat these places as they really are. Just as physical spaces, we spend time here, for many more than they do in the physical world, and we can watch as these places shift and change with time. Some of them continue to be successful, some of them are brand new, but others are in decline or have been abandoned. And it tracks that just like the physical world, these places can evoke those same feelings of presence, those ghosts.
I find that many of these dying or abandoned digital spaces remind me of dead malls, social places of commerce, entertainment, and fun which have become outdated and are either redeveloped or left alone, empty and unused. There's something special about virtual places like this though. The way they express their decay is unique, with glitches and internet rot as referenced assets disappear or become outdated. And unlike physical spaces, they can be saved, copied, and shared on hard drives.
So if you find that these virtual places are important to you, the ones which may be on the edge of disappearing or in slow decay, try going there again. While you're there, you may begin to feel a certain presence, a ghost of place, there with you. Thank you for watching, everyone.
I forgot to mention, the music for this video is available for free to download on my Patreon.
If you'll excuse me, I gotta head back into the net. Whoa!